So welcome to Plodcast, episode 78. It's been a long and interesting journey. Don't know how you guys put up with it, but thank you for sticking with it. Well, unless you just joined us, then you don't get that kind of gratitude. But if you've been here from the beginning, if you've listened to all 77 thus far, you're about to hear number 78. So, Plodcast, episode 78. Welcome. So I wanted to begin by talking about South City Church in St. Louis. This controversy just broke a few days ago, and so by the time you hear this, you may know more than I do, or there may be more information that's come out. But basically, I don't know what it is with St. Louis and the PCA. There's something in the water there. There's something wrong, something not good. But of course, there was a PCA church in the St. Louis area that hosted the Revoice conference this last summer, and there was a big hue and a cry about that. And I have not heard of any kind of resolution from that. And just recently, it came out just a few days ago. It came out on online that another PCA church in the St. Louis area, South City Church, was hosting an event sponsored by a group called Faith for Justice. That was one of the founders of that group was Michelle Higgins, the daughter of the pastor, Mike Higgins, and Mike Higgins, the pastor, is on the board of this outfit, and they were hosting an event where an active lesbian speaker was coming in order to equip or train the saints on how to mourn the death of transsexual folk. So this came out online, and there wasn't. I can't say there was a hue and a cry. There were a couple of blogs that addressed it, Denny Burke's and mine, and there was a guy on Facebook who I think may have broken the story, Foster. And so there was enough of a hue and a cry, let's put it this way, for the session of South City Church to meet and talk about it and issue a statement. So without getting into the event itself or the speaker who's going to be at the event, I just want to make a few comments about the statement that South City Church has made and talk about how lame it is, how mealy-mouthed it is. Here's something. Let me just read the first paragraph of their statement. In the past few days, the session and pastoral staff of South City Church became aware of details concerning an event that was to be hosted on its property on January 20th, 2019, sponsored and organized by Faith for Justice, a Christian advocacy and social justice organization. Upon being informed of the details of the event, the session and pastoral staff met and determined that some of the planned elements within this particular event appeared to be inconsistent with South City Church's theological convictions. We have thus determined that South City Church's facility should no longer be used for the Faith for Justice event, originally scheduled for January 20th. At no point was the event a South City Church event or part of a South City Church worship service. So, and then near the end of the statement, we have this. It says, further, we believe hateful and harassing attitudes directed toward any of God's image bearers, including LGBT plus people, are to be repudiated. So there are just several things that I want to point out about this statement. Right? The first is how tepid the statements in the first paragraph are, and how much wiggle room remains within that statement. Upon being informed of the details of the event, so we knew something about the event, we knew the broad outlines, we knew what was going, but there's some details that sort of got us checkmated. The session and pastoral staff met and determined that some of the planned elements, not all, but some of the planned elements within this particular event appeared to be inconsistent What do you mean appeared to be? They were inconsistent. What do you mean appeared to be? This is just as lame as it gets. Upon being informed of the details of the event, the session and pastoral staff met and determined that some of the planned elements within this particular event appeared to be inconsistent, we might say within parentheses, after due consideration at the end of the day when all accounts have been considered. On the one hand, ism, and on the other hand, ism, with South City Church's theological convictions. And it's pretty apparent from the preceding statement that the word convictions there needs to be put in quotation marks. So here's the other. In the last paragraph, I want to say something about their stand against hateful and harassing attitudes directed toward any of God's image bearers, including LGBT plus people. Now, every Orthodox Christian believes that the image of God is to be honored and respected in every image bearer. That means your worst enemy. That means that everybody that you encounter bears the image of God, and you're not supposed to be spiteful or hateful or malicious or evil toward them. That's granted, but you need to see and pick up on how this way of framing it takes that important truth and twists it, sending us off in a wrong direction. We believe hateful and harassing attitudes directed toward any of God's image bearers, including editors of neo-Confederate newsletters and LGBT plus people, are to be repudiated. Are editors of neo-Confederate newsletters image bearers? Do they bear the image of God? Well, yes. Are they? Is that image to be honored and respected? Well, yes, just as it is when a conservative Christian interacts with open homosexual. Of course, one of the reasons why we're so concerned about this and why we oppose this kind of sexual expression so much is precisely because these people are image bearers. So this is a coy way of steering us toward an inability to condemn the sin that is exhibited by LGBT plus people, and notice how that plus is creeping into more and more communication. What's in there? What's under that plus? What does that plus include? What sexual perversion is not included in that under that plus? Necrophilia, sex dolls, bestiality. What's under that plus? Would someone please define it for us? In short, let me just put it this way. The initial controversy of the initial event is bad enough. But anybody who wants to know whether or not the PCA is circling the drain needs to look at responses like this one delivered out in public by South City Church. And they need to look at whether this lame excuse, this lame statement, is going to be accepted. Is it going to be good enough so that they don't run afoul of their presbytery? I believe the answer is yes, it will be good enough. I don't think it'll be good enough for thoughtful observers, but I think it'll be good enough for the PCA. So continuing with Plodcast episode 78, I come to our book review. Now this book review is a little bit off the beaten path. It's I'll explain. This small book is a book by my father, and it's called How to Be Free from Bitterness. How to Be Free from Bitterness. And I want to tell the story of how this book came about, and then a little bit about it. My dad has been a conference speaker. He's now 91, but over the years over the decades he was a conference speaker before he became a pastor. And as a conference speaker, one of the talks that he developed that he would delivered at various conferences was this talk on how to be free from bitterness. One of the things that characterizes my dad's ministry over the years, over the decades, has been an emphasis on basic, practical Christianity, how to honor and respect your parents, how to confess your sins, how to deal with bitterness, and so on. And this was one of his standard go-to talks that he would deliver at these conferences that he would do. And it always got a big reaction, because when you gather up a group of Christians, the chances are pretty good that everybody in the room is dealing with bitterness in one way or another. It's a very common temptation. It's a temptation and sin that can blend in nicely in a church community in the way that an open attending of orgies would not say. So there's certain church disreputable sins as far as church life is concerned, and then there are sins, prayer requests, gossip disguised as prayer requests, bitterness disguised as zeal for truth, and so on. So bitterness is unfortunately very common in many churches. So giving a talk on this, how to deal with bitterness, is kind of like hitting the ground with your hat. It's not that hard to deliver a talk that is potent and powerful. But even though it's not that hard, it requires a goodish bit of courage. You need to go straight up the middle. So a number of years ago, actually a number of decades ago, we had this tape floating from one of Dad's conferences. The tape was floating around, a cassette tape, the old school. And this cassette tape, How to Be Free from Bitterness, was something I picked it up, and I had the idea somewhere. I had my secretary transcribe the talk and type it out, and then I went through and edited it and cleaned it up. Talks as they are delivered verbally sometimes have incomplete sentences and various things. So I went through, cleaned it up, edited it, and all this without telling my dad. So we then shipped off, had it typeset, shipped it off to a printer, designed a cover for a booklet, How to Be Free from Bitterness. And I think we ordered like 2,000 of them. And so we had a stack about 3 feet high, a couple of boxes thick, of these booklets that got delivered to our office. And so I called my dad and said, "Hey, when you have a chance, do you want to come by the office, and I want to show you something." And so he showed up at the office, and I said, "Hey, look at this book you wrote. look at this thing you wrote, How to Be Free from Bitterness." Well, that encouragement was all my dad needed. Since that time, if you go to CCM, Community Christian Ministries website, there are it's been translated into like 15 to 20 languages. CCM has distributed hundreds of thousands of copies of How to Be Free from Bitterness. There's a main distribution channel is sending it to penitentiaries and prisoners and so forth. Canon Press has a version of the book in book form. CCM publishes it in sort of a newsprint magazine-sized format, How to Be Free from Bitterness. But in whatever format, it's gone all over the place. It's just been a very effective and potent tool. The thing that's so effective about this is that in this booklet, Dad basically says, look, the Bible says not to be bitter. Put away all bitterness. Don't be bitter. And there's an optical illusion that when we don't do that, it's because of an optical illusion. When let's say I were to shoplift something, whenever I thought about what I did, it would be what I would think about is my shoplifting, my stealing. If I told a lie to somebody, whenever I thought about the situation, what I would think about, what would come to mind, is my lie. But if someone lies about me and they spread the lie all over town, whenever I think of the situation, I don't think of my bitterness. I think of their lie. That's the optical illusion. It's misdirection. Bitterness is the kind of sin that immediately, as soon as you're in that territory, you're thinking about what somebody else did to you. And here's the problem. You can confess somebody else's sin all day long, and your joy doesn't return. In order to deal with bitterness, you have to confess it as though the bitterness were your own and as though the bitterness were your own sin. And that's what this booklet does. And it does it in a winsome, powerful, straight-up-the-middle kind of way. Many, many people have been delivered from bitterness through reading this booklet and being confronted with the reality that bitterness is your problem, not the other person's problem. Even if the other person genuinely sinned against you, your bitterness is your problem. And oftentimes when you're bitter, it turns out at the end of the day that the other person didn't genuinely sin against you. It was just your bitterness projecting sin onto them. Somebody once said that bitterness is like eating a box of rat poison and then waiting for the rat to die. It doesn't work that way. And so you can go to CCM's website to get a copy of this. You can order it from Canon Press. How to Be Free from Bitterness by Jim Wilson. Hamartiology. This is the section of our Plodcast where we are working our way through the New Testament, talking about all the different sins that are listed in the Greek word that corresponds to those sins that are listed in the New Testament. In Romans 1, Paul gives a list of sins, and this is a very common thing for him. He frequently gives us a small library of sins, a small catalog of sins. But in this list, it is striking that the characteristic note in this particular list is that of venom. Among other things, he chastises maliciousness, envy, murder, malignity, whispering, that's all verse 29, and then backbiting in verse 30, being without natural affection, implacable, and unmerciful, verse 31. And our focus today is this last word, unmerciful. This is the rendering of Aneleemon, and this is let me break that down. Aneleemon. Excuse me, there we go. And this is a word that occurs once in the New Testament, and that's here. Those who love God love to show mercy. Those who hate him are unmerciful. The devil is an accuser, and he hates mercy. God delights in mercy, and people show themselves readily to be of the devil's party by an unmerciful attitude. That's one of the main banners that will fly above the devil's regiments.
You've spent a pleasant half hour with Plodcast proprietor Douglas Wilson. This podcast is produced by Canon Press. Please take a moment to subscribe to the Plodcast on your favorite listening platform. To hear more from Doug, please visit canonpress.com.